2 weeks ago, I held a will with Harlan's signature. The sheriff said he'd been dead 6 months. Both were true, for a moment. Here's how a collapsed shed, a humming freezer, and a sugar house stove rewrote my life. I was making soup when the shed across the stone wall gave way and folded into itself like a paper house. The day had been bright and brittle, one of those sharp late winter afternoons when the cold isn't playful anymore. In Vermont, the snow lingers. Then it turns dense. Then it gets mean. The wind shook the bare limbs of the maples, rattling the last of the leaves still clinging from October. And a second later, I heard the crash. It didn't sound like a single noise. It was a quick cascade, roof beams slipping, nails letting go, heavy sheets of tin sliding off, the wordless groan a building makes when it stops being a building. I thought for half a beat that I should call someone, anyone. Then I thought of Harlan Whitcomb, and I grabbed my coat. I've been a widow 6 years. You think you know what quiet is until you move through a house with only your own footsteps in it. That afternoon, my kitchen clock thumped each second as if it were reminding me I was late for something. I turned off the gas, slid the spoon onto a small plate, and stepped into the cold, pulling the collar up against my neck. Harlan's place sits 100 feet from mine, across an old stone fence that runs like a spine between our yards before it drops into the sugar bush. He was the first person to bring me a pie when Ben died. It was store-bought, and his hands shook when he handed it over, but it was the gesture that matters. We were never quite friends, not in the way you are in summer when you grill together, but we were neighbors. He nodded when I carried in groceries. I waved when he shuffled down to get the mail. I knew the names of the men who had built his house in 1864. He knew the names of the women who checked out the romance novels on Tuesdays because I used to run the front desk at the library on Main. He was a map maker, in the old way, the sort of man who speaks like each word costs something, but shows you a creek no one has named. That spring would have been the first one he didn't make it to, but that day in late March, when his shed collapsed, I didn't remember dates. I remembered only that I hadn't seen a car in his driveway for a while, and I didn't think the town should have left a structure that tired so close to the road. I crossed over, boots crunching on the crusted snow, and peered into the ruin. The roof had gone flat, the ridgepole split. Plywood leaned up like a jagged tooth, and all the things men keep in sheds, coffee cans of screws, an oiled saw, a coil of hose that never gets put away in October the way you swear you'll do next year, sprawled out in a wet mess. I cupped my hands around my mouth and called his name even though I knew better. Harlan? There was no answer. There was nothing but the slow hiss of snow sliding off tin and the faraway sound of a truck on County 17. My eyes followed an orange extension cord snaking out from beneath what had been his workbench. It trailed to a corner of the shed where the wall had fallen in one piece, unbroken, a panel of rough boards tacked over an opening. The cord disappeared beneath it. It was ridiculous, but I stepped over the wreckage and pushed on that panel. It was fastened by habit, not hardware. The wall scraped, then swung. Behind it, a short set of steps dropped into a black gap I hadn't known was there. We have basements here with trapdoors and root cellars where canning jars glow like jewels in the dark. But Harlan was a man without a wife, without children, a man whose pantry held single servings and the sort of mustard that has to be pushed hard to get any out. A secret set of stairs behind his shed felt like a mistake. Still, there it was. Maybe it wasn't my business. Maybe the last good thing you can do for people is to leave them alone. Then the wind pushed the panel against my shoulder as if it were reminding me that I had already decided. I fished the small flashlight from my coat pocket. The habits you develop when you live alone, and stepped down. The air smelled like damp wood and snow. The steps were solid, old pine boards that had seen hands like mine on their way down. The beam of my light found the end of the orange cord. It plugged into a single outlet screwed onto a stud, and the outlet fed a white chest freezer with the kind of rounded corners you don't see anymore. It was the old kind, the kind people talk about when they tell stories about kids getting trapped inside. This one hummed. It sounded like a mosquito in a room you can't find but can't ignore. When I set my hand on the lid, the cold gripped my palm right through my glove. It occurred to me only then that what I was doing could be crazy. People keep venison in these. Their summer berries, tool and die men kept their lunch pails on them. But this freezer wasn't in a kitchen. It was in a dirt-walled pit under a collapsed shed, powered off a cord that might have been live or might have been stolen. And Harlan, well, I didn't know then what to do with Harlan. I made myself breathe. If I took my hand off and walked back up those stairs, I wouldn't sleep that night. I would lie in bed and watch the blue numbers on my bedside clock and wonder. If there is one thing being 65 taught me, it's that wondering is worse than knowing. The lid was heavier than it looked. It stuck a little, then released with a soft sigh. Smoky white air rolled out and over my hands. I coughed and waved it away. At first, all I could see was frost. Then, as the cold cleared, I saw a gray metal lockbox sitting on top of several frozen packages wrapped in butcher paper. The lockbox was familiar in the same way all lockboxes are familiar. Flat, boxy, a small keyhole, a dent in one corner that made me think someone had dropped it once when someone else called their name. The box was taped shut with a strip of blue painter's tape. On the tape, in thin, steady letters, someone had written, "For Peg." The writing was neat, a little too careful, like the way men write when they don't write much but want to be sure you read it. I swallowed. Peg is what people call me here when they've known me long enough. Margaret is what the doctor uses when he wants to tell me I should drink more water. There's only one person on this road who would write my name on a box like that. Under the box was a Ziploc bag with two things in it, a key on a small brass ring and a folded note. My fingers shook more than I wanted to admit as I pulled the bag open. The key looked like it belonged to the lockbox. The note was the kind of brown you get when you handle paper with hands that have been in wood smoke and oil. When I unfolded it, 3 words were printed in the same careful hand. Take this inside. This is how people like me get into trouble. We think if a thing is written down, then it must be a good idea. I took the key. I set the lockbox on my hip. I pushed the lid down until the vacuum sealed it with a soft click. I climbed the steps, slid the wall panel back into place, and picked my way across the wreckage, careful not to step on the saw whose teeth were smiling at me. Back in my kitchen, I set the lockbox on the table. My soup had a skin on it, and my house smelled like the old rosemary I'd thrown in for bravery. I slid the key into the lock, and it turned with a tiny shiver, like it was relieved to be used. Inside the lockbox were 3 things: a small digital recorder, a document rolled and tied with a green ribbon, and an envelope stamped by the post office in town last week. The envelope had my name on it. The recorder had a single button, worn smooth by a thumb that had wanted to listen again and again. The ribbon on the document made me think of Christmas mornings when Ben would help me tie bows when my hands had gotten clumsy. I went for the envelope first. The flap lifted easily. Inside was a short letter, 2 paragraphs, careful penmanship. Peg, if you're reading this, it means I got overcautious too late. I never was much for trust, and I apologize for leaving my mess at your door. You never asked for the trouble of other people's last wishes. The box is cold for a reason. Someone is trying to hurry me along to the place the paper says I already am. I didn't think I'd ever be the man who writes if I don't make it, but here we are. Don't trust the ones who bring casseroles with questions in their eyes. They'll tell you it's grief, then they'll ask for signatures. Take the recorder to Sheriff Ward. He knows where to find me if he still knows how to look. As for the paper tied in green, I signed my name. I hope it's still worth something. H. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until my chest hurt. I unfolded the paper with the velvet ribbon. It was a will. Last will and testament of Harlan Emery Whitcomb. It read at the top in legal font that never gets happy no matter what it's about. It had 3 pages, signatures, a notary seal pressed into it like a thumbprint. The date on it was 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks. 2 weeks. And Harlan Whitcomb had been dead 6 months. I drove to the sheriff's office with my heart in the wrong place. People always think about their hearts lodging in their throats. Mine sat down in the bottom of my stomach like a stone. I carried the lockbox in a grocery tote with the recorder slipped into my coat pocket like a secret. That's what you do here when something is not for everyone to see. You hide it in plain sight. Sheriff Tom Ward has been in his job long enough to know when not to talk. I remember him as the kid who used to run the base paths for the high school team when Ben and I would take our folding chairs to games. He looks now like a man who has raised 2 daughters and taught a dog to heel, lined around the eyes, careful with compliments, and never quite surprised anymore. When I walked in, he stood up. "Peg," he said. "You all right?" "I think so," I said, and realized as I said it that the answer lived more in hope than in evidence. "I need to show you something." I put the will on his desk. He leaned forward and his eyes took it in the way men like him do. Slow, steady, cataloging before reacting. He checked the seal and the signature and the date. I watched his jaw flex as if he were chewing a piece of information that wouldn't break down easy. "Where did you get this?" he asked. I told him about the shed, the hidden steps, the old freezer humming, the box with my name on blue tape. I told him without embroidery because the facts already sounded like a story, and I have learned that stories make men suspicious when they play sheriff. He listened. His hands made a small tent in front of his mouth. When I finished, he leaned back. "Peg," he said carefully, "Harlan Whitcomb died last September." "I remember," I said. "I made a casserole. Tuna noodle with the cornflakes on top. I set it on the table at the Grange and worried the whole damn time people would think I was cheap." "You came to the service," he said. "We all did." "I know." My palms were sweating into the fabric of my gloves. But his freezer didn't know any of that. He looked again at the paper. "This is dated exactly 2 weeks ago. That's not possible." "Unless it is," I said. "And the man we buried was someone nobody looked at very long." His eyes met mine. There are moments when life steps on the gas and you feel your insides go backward even as the car leaps forward. This was one of them. You can sit in a chair and have the ground move under you. "Do you have anything else?" he said. I took out the recorder and slid it across the desk. He turned it over in his hands the same way I had. He pressed play. The voice that filled the office made my eyes sting. You can forget the color of someone's eyes and the exact slope of their shoulders, but a voice comes back like a smell. It was Harlan. His low, gravelly drawl, the cadence that made a story sound like an inventory, and an inventory sound like a prayer. "If you're listening," his voice said, "it means I didn't get off the road I needed to get off in time. I know what the county has on paper about me, and I know what this paper I signed says I have left undone. If it confuses you, that's because it should. I did my own confusing. I'm responsible for that." There was a pause. In the space of it, I pictured his kitchen, the chipped ceramic rooster on the windowsill, the radio always on in the morning with someone telling you if the schools were delayed. I pictured his hands, big square-knuckled hands that could split wood and also fold a map down to the exact square you needed. "I have a granddaughter," he said. "They tell it like I didn't, but I do. Her name's Lila. I'm sorry for how late I am saying it. I was late for a lot of things. If I'm gone, if I'm the kind of gone where people are supposed to bring flowers and tell stories, then make sure what I wrote is followed. Don't let them pretend they don't know how to read. The woman who comes with a casserole and smiles like she's sorry will be the same one who forged my name on 3 sets of papers nobody's looked too hard at. She thinks I don't see her. I do. People like that think they're smarter than old men. They're not. They're just faster." There was another pause in which I heard something that might have been whined over a microphone. Then, "If you're Peg reading this, I picked you because you haven't forgotten how to be angry and still be kind. The world needs that. Don't do anything that gets you hurt." The recording clicked and went silent. Sheriff Ward stared at the small black rectangle on his desk as if it might offer a second track if he waited long enough. He picked up the will and the letter and the recorder. He stood, walked to the door and turned the sign to closed. He locked the bolt and walked back. "Who was the hospice nurse who signed his papers last fall?" he said to no one in particular. Then he pulled a file from a drawer with the ease of a man who knows where all his papers sleep. He flipped. He read. He flipped again. He stopped. "Peg," he said, "you need to tell me if you know this name." He turned the file toward me. A copy of the death certificate lay on top with a group of signatures at the bottom. One was the name of the attending physician. One was the funeral director. The other was the hospice case manager, printed in tidy letters I knew too well, because there had been cards and invitations and grocery lists written in that hand on my kitchen counter, long before there were only my things on my counters. Elena Pike. She married my son when she was 26. She wore a dress that looked like cream, and the day smelled like peonies. She worked then in medical billing at the hospital, and I thought she was what life does to keep you gentle when you get older. Nate would bring her over on Sundays, and she'd laugh at Ben's bad jokes and eat 2 helpings of pie and wash the plates like we were already family. When the accident took my son 3 winters later, on a night so slick no one should have been driving, I thought the world had decided to demonstrate what absence looks like in a body. Elena moved away 2 months after the funeral, as if our town were a coat that had gotten too tight. I saw her once after that in a grocery store 3 towns over. She hugged me so hard I thought my ribs would snap and told me she had to go to the city to find work, that she couldn't breathe here, and I didn't say any of the small, hard things rattling around inside my mouth. The Elena whose name was on this paper wasn't the Elena who ate pie. I looked up at the sheriff and made myself keep my voice even. "Yes," I said. "I know her." "You want to tell me how?" he asked gently. "She was my daughter-in-law," I said. "Then she wasn't." He didn't write anything down. He didn't have to. We both knew how small towns work. We both knew the way doors that used to open with a thought can start to stick when too many people in a place have heard your name in a sentence you didn't write. "I think she knows where all the houses are with doors like mine," I said. "People think rural means slow and dumb. It just means there are places you can pull a truck up 2 feet from somebody's kitchen and no one notices." He opened the small notebook he'd found in Harlan's freezer. The pages were filled with cramped notes in pencil. He read silently for a long minute, then turned the book toward me. On the page he'd been reading, Harlan had sketched a map. He had drawn his house, the shed, the path down through the sugar bush, and a small rectangle between 2 maples at the edge of the creek labeled Sugar House. Beside it, he'd written, "Storage under stove. Keep quiet." "We need to see that sugar house," Sheriff Ward said, and I knew by the set of his shoulders that there were other things he wanted to say and wasn't saying. We hiked down through the brittle crust of snow. The sugar house roof shone in the low sun like a thing buried too shallow. When we pushed the door, it swung easily on oiled hinges. The smell of maple lived in there like a ghost you wouldn't mind haunting you. A long stove squatted in the middle, black with a flue that pierced the roof and a 2-compartment pan perched on top like a crown. Harlan's handwriting had put us here with such confidence that for a second I expected to see him bent over a hydrometer, testing syrup. Instead, the room waited with the unsettling neatness of a place not used recently, but kept ready for inspection. Ward knelt by the stove and tapped the metal on the side. Then he edged his fingers along the base and felt. His face changed the way a poker player's does when he thinks he has the card he needs. He slid his fingertips under a lip I couldn't see, pulled, and a panel came away with a small pop. Behind it was a space filled with 2 plastic bins. He set them out gently, as if there were something alive inside. He opened the first. It was full of manila folders and a quart-sized bag with thumb drives. He opened the second. Inside it, wrapped in a quilt like the one my grandmother used to keep on the back of her sofa, was a baby. My breath went somewhere too far away to find. The baby's face was pale and perfect, the color of the inside of a seashell. A knit cap the color of damp moss covered the small head. The chest moved, a little too fast. The tiny mouth opened and closed like it was speaking a language that didn't use sound. The sheriff said the word Jesus, as if he had just met him. Then he was on his radio. More words than tone, controlled chaos that other men like him knew how to hear. I moved without remembering deciding to move. I slid my hands under the child, felt the impossible smallness and impossible weight of a new life. The little body was warmer than I expected, the quilt doing its work. When I pressed my cheek to that face, I felt the soft breath that is the only sound newborns make when the world is too big. The helicopter didn't come. This is Vermont. Everything takes the road. The ambulance made the turn onto the old access lane like a careful friend, and 2 medics burst through the sugar house door with a small kit and faces you'd trust with anything. They didn't ask me questions. They took the baby, took vitals, murmured comfort to someone who couldn't hear words, and in a breath, they were gone. I stood still after they left. You stand still after things like that because your body needs instructions, and you have none to give it. The sheriff was on the radio again, and then he was next to me, his hand on my elbow, guiding me out into the cold air, the way you lead a person who has forgotten how to move. "They'll take the baby to County General," he said. "They'll call DCF and NICU and whoever else needs calling. We'll go too." How did he fit a whole person into a sugar stove? I heard myself ask. And the sheriff's mouth twitched like he wanted to laugh and it couldn't get past the place in his chest where anger was sitting heavy. At the hospital, I learned again that love comes dressed as strangers in scrubs. The child went under lights and into warmth. A nurse named Nora with soft, dark hair and a voice that could make a wound feel less lonely told me words like stable and observation and feeds. She asked me if I knew the baby's name. I shook my head and said, "I think she's a she." And Nora nodded and wrote "Baby Girl Unknown" on a clipboard. And I hated the way words can be so precise and so wrong at the same time. The Department for Children and Families arrived as if someone had pressed a button. A woman in a gray blazer with a phone in her hand introduced herself as Alana Reeves and asked me the same questions the sheriff had asked and the nurse had asked, and then she asked them again because that's part of her job. See if the story changes, because sometimes the story changes and that means things. I told the truth the way I had told it already 3 times. I told it slower. I didn't try to make it sound better or worse. When I finished, Alana took a breath and gave me a look I recognized from the mirror. "You understand that if there isn't a parent identified in the next 24 hours, the baby will be placed with a certified foster family," she said. "It's not personal. It's how we work." I nodded, even though everything in me wanted to shout. The man who left the will left her to someone I managed. In it, he says the name Lila. "Lila," she said, writing it. "If that's her name, we'll use it." "Can I sit with her?" I asked. Until whatever comes next." She softened at the edges. "For a little while," she said. "You're not family." The word fell between us and embarrassed us both. Sheriff Ward found me in a chair by the glass. Baby Girl Unknown lay under a lamp with her hands clenched like tiny birds trying to decide if the sky was safe. Her chest rose and fell like a reminder. The sheriff didn't say anything for a minute. He just stood and looked as if the sight of a person who hadn't even learned wrong yet could recalibrate him. When he finally spoke, he sounded tired. "Lab came back," he said. "The will is real. The seal is real. The notary is a woman in Montpelier who doesn't remember ever signing for Harlan, but the stamp and the registry number are hers. She's old. She made a funny face when we showed her his name, and then said maybe someone came by her porch one Friday. Who would do that? I asked. The same kind of person who knows exactly how to make a death certificate slide onto the right desk at the right time, he said. He pulled a chair over and sat. "Peg, I'm going to ask you something I need you to answer with more honesty than politeness." "All right," I said and straightened. "Did Elena have a reason to keep a baby quiet?" he asked. "A reason to not tell anyone?" I could have lied. There are lies that save other people from rearranging their picture of the world, but women my age don't have time for that. 2 months after Nate died, I said, she came to my house with a cardboard box and told me she was moving. She didn't look up much while she talked. When she did, she had that look you have when you're looking at a light too bright and you haven't blinked yet. I asked if she needed money. She said she was fine. I asked if she was all right. She said it'd fine all right. I asked if there was anything I could do, and she said it'd tell me how to be alone. And I said you don't. And then she left. She was wearing a big coat. It could have been to hide weight. It could have been to hide from me. You think she was pregnant, he said. I think it is possible, I said. I also think if she was scared, and people who are scared and smart are more dangerous than people who are just one of those things. He rubbed his jaw with his hand. We'll run a fast DNA, he said, on the baby with your swab. It's the quickest way to cut through the fog. DNA, I asked, but my voice knew before my head did, and it went high and thin like an attic beam. Tom, please don't. Peg, he said, and the way he said my name told me everything I didn't want to know. They swabbed my cheek in a small room that smelled like lemon and old paper towels. I did not feel the swab. I felt every day since my son had laughed last, each one a grain of sand you can't spit out. The test took less time than you would think a thing like that should take. Science has got faster and messier and more sure of itself since I learned the Dewey Decimal System by heart. In the time between a sandwich and a sunset, Sheriff Ward stood at the door of the quiet room again. He didn't come in until I nodded. It's a match, he said, 25%. The lab says it's not even one of those, maybe if you squint matches. It's clean. The world shifted again. I felt the chair hold me up the way the hand of a man you trust holds you when the music changes too fast. Baby girl unknown was not unknown to me. She's mine, I said. Then I had to say it again because the words felt impossible and true at the same time. She's my granddaughter. Nora the nurse found a box of tissues and put it in my hands. It is crazy what we offer each other in the face of the impossible. Thin paper and a quiet presence and a soft place to sit. It is also enough. Her name is Lila, I said. And Nora nodded and wrote it neatly on a card and slid it into the slot on the bassinet, and suddenly the world had a new name in it. I didn't sleep that night either, but I did rest. There is a difference. The sheriff went home, and the hospital got quiet, and the night nurse hummed something under her breath that might have been, "Take me home, country roads," or might have been, "Hush, little baby." I sat by the glass and watched Lila's chest rise and fall and thought about the way a new life makes the world both bigger and smaller at once. In the morning, Alana from DCF came back with a clipboard like a small shield. She sat beside me and spoke in a voice polished smooth by use. "Miss Hollis," she said, "I need to talk to you about next steps." "Peg," I said, "Mrs. Hollis makes me sound like I'm bringing brownies to the Kiwanis." "All right, Peg," she said with a small smile she maybe didn't mean to let out. "Here's where we are. We have a baby. We have proof of a relation. We have an elderly neighbor's will naming a beneficiary with the same name as the infant. And we have suspicion of fraud related to the older gentleman's death certificate. That means 3 agencies want to do something, and none of us wants to step on the other's toes. What we can do immediately is place Lila in protective custody under the state, and then we can explore kinship placement with you as soon as we clear preliminary checks." "Preliminary checks," I repeated. She nodded. "Home inspection, fingerprints, background, a medical note that you can safely care for an infant. The court can grant temporary custody to a relative if it's in the child's best interest. I raised a boy," I said, surprising myself with the sharpness in my voice. "He turned out good. He turned out kind. He turned out so ready for life the world didn't know what to do with him and took him early. I can change a diaper in the dark with my eyes closed. I can read a fever with my wrist. I know the difference between a hungry cry and a tired cry, and I can love a person enough to make them brave." She looked at my hands. "There is a tenderness to the way care workers look at the hands of grandmothers. I don't doubt that," she said. "I have to write things on forms that don't measure the important stuff. The system needs boxes. People don't fit in them, but I will write the truth on the line where it says impressions." I exhaled through my nose like a kettle letting off steam. "I'll do whatever it takes," I said. "I'll put locks on every cabinet and caps on every outlet. I'll take your classes and your tests, but don't take her somewhere I don't know." "Peg," she said, "there's law and there's mercy. Today I can give you mercy. I'll put you on the list for supervised visitation while the paperwork churns, which is a way of saying you can sit with her every day this week for as long as the nurse says you aren't in the way." "Thank you," I whispered. and it hurt like a blessing. By the time the sun had flattened itself across the parking lot, Sheriff Ward came back with a face that had found a few more lines. "We found something else in the bins," he said. "Data, records that smell like Elena Pike." He laid out photocopies on the small table in the visitation room. My eyes traveled over neat columns of numbers, dates, invoices submitted to insurers, hospice intake forms signed in the jittery pen of people just trying to get through the day. On 2, the signatures looked too steady, too perfect, like someone had traced a nervous hand and then corrected its small mistakes. "She's been moving money," he said. "Small amounts, so nothing screams when it hits an account. But it adds up, and the dates line up suspiciously with the morning we put dirt on Harlan's grave." "Where is she?" I asked. "Gone," he said. "At least for now. Her last legit address is an apartment in Brattleboro that still has her name on the mailbox, but nobody remembers seeing her lately. Her phone goes to voicemail and then dies. She's not at her mother's. She's not at the cousin's place in Rutland, and the boyfriend in West Lebanon says he hasn't seen her since January, but I can see the lie in his beard." "She's good," I said. "She knows how to go soft at the edges so you can't catch hold of her." He sat and leaned forward. "Peg, I need you to be ready to hear something you're not going to like. We're going to check Nate's crash again." The air moved out of the room like a tide. "You think she—" I began, and the rest of the sentence was a noise more than a word. "I think coincidence gets a bad reputation," he said, "but it also ought to know when it's out of its depth. Your son dies on a night when nobody should have been out, and his wife leaves town and lands in a job that gives her access to the one kind of paper that makes the whole world bend. The kind that says someone is dead, and then a neighbor with property and no obvious heirs dies on paper when he's not dead in a body, and there's a baby nobody admits to." He put a hand out but didn't touch me. "We'll be careful. We'll be kind. I'm not interested in inventing a villain. I want the truth, and I'm willing to dislike the truth if I have to." "I loved her," I said, the words tearing their way out, "even after. I loved her because she belonged to my son and because I believed in the part of her that laughed at my husband's jokes." He nodded, the way good men do when a woman is learning something she didn't want to learn. "We'll bring you everything we find." 2 days later, while I was in my kitchen learning how to boil a bottle without burning the hand that held the tongs, my phone rang. The number was unknown. I let it go to the machine because women like me don't pick up unknown numbers. We don't have to anymore. The machine clicked and a pause hung in the air, and then a voice. I knew the way you know a song you forgot you loved filled the room. "Peg," Elena said, "if you want to know the truth, come alone." I lifted the handset like an old reflex had reached for it without me. "Elena," I said. It sounded like a prayer and a curse at once. "If you call the sheriff," she said, "I'll know." "How?" I asked. "Because you've forgotten who taught me to watch," she said. And I pictured her sitting in my kitchen 10 years ago accompanied by the quiet hum of winter, the way she used to smile at nothing and then say, "I love how you notice things that other people don't." I hated being turned into a lesson that way. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. "Because if you let men like Tom Ward write the story, I'm the monster and you're the hero, and that's too simple for the truth," she said. "Come to Whitcomb's Sugar House at midnight. No headlights, no sheriff. The rest is up to you." The line went quiet. My machine clicked. The kitchen hummed with the sound of the refrigerator, the same way Harlan's freezer had hummed. If I had been a different kind of woman, I would have called Tom instantly. Instead, I waited until I could breathe without making a noise, and then I called him. "We set a trap," he said, without the sighs or the "you should have dones" he had the right to use. "You go. You wear a wire. You tell her what she wants to hear until she tells us what we need to hear. I don't like using you. I like losing you less." I looked at the clock. Midnight was 10.5 hours away. A day can expand to fill as much fear as you pour into it. I spent the afternoon at the hospital. Nora taught me how to hold Lila so that the formula didn't pool in her mouth and scare her. She taught me how to tap her back with 2 fingers to burp the small bubbles out. She taught me how to tell when a cry was pain instead of protest. I used to know all this, I said, frustrated with the clumsy fat of my fingers. You do know it, she said. Your hands remember. Let them. At 6, I went home and stood under the shower until the hot water my small heater could produce ran out. I put on the warmest clothes I owned and slipped a button camera into the seam of my coat collar, just where Sheriff Ward said it should go. He came by at 10 and went over the plan again. His words were careful and boring and exactly what you want words to be before a thing like this. At 11:30, I drove down our road without headlights. The moon was almost full and the snow held the light like a field of milk. In the back seat on the floor was a canvas bag that held nothing but a folded fleece blanket and a doll someone had left at the library lost and found for a year, and I had brought home and washed. If Elena wanted a baby, she wouldn't get one. She would get a bag with a lie in it. I parked where Harlan used to park when he tapped the trees, in the little dip off the lane, and I sat with the engine off and watched the fog of my breath in the cold air. Through the trees, I could see the shadow of the sugar house, squatting in the dark with its black stovepipe pointing at the moon. My hands shook so hard on the wheel I had to set them in my lap. I walked the last 30 yards. The snow creaked. When I pushed the door, it moved and groaned like a tired animal. Inside, it was very dark and very still. Elena, I said. Close the door, she said, and her voice came from the far corner where the light from the moon fell in a gray triangle. She stepped forward. Her hair was shorter, cut with kitchen scissors. Her coat was one of those puffy ones that look like sleeping bags and make everyone look like the same person. Her eyes were the same, darting and steady all at once. You came, she said. You called, I said. You told the sheriff, she said. I did, I said. She smiled. You always were honest to a fault, she said. It's why I liked you and why you're dangerous. You left a baby in a stove, I said. Dangerous has a definition. She wasn't cold, Elena said. He kept it warm in there. He kept everything warm. He was good at warm, that old man. You forged a death certificate, I said. I didn't do anything 1,000 people don't do every day when they're tired and want to get home before dark, she said. I let paper do what paper is for. What does that mean? I asked. It means a man who didn't want to die yet made a deal with me to pretend like he had so that people would stop looking for him, she said. It means he ran away from his body for a little while. It means I helped him. It means he didn't pay me what he said he would. That's a lot of means, I said. He was dying, she said, as if that had earned her something. Slow like tree rot. He wanted the county off his back. He wanted time to fix something he had ruined 40 years ago. He thought he could outrun cancer by writing letters. The only thing that moves slower than cancer is a man's mind when it finally decides to be responsible. What did he ruin? I asked, even though I could guess. He loved a girl who wasn't supposed to be loved, she said. He sent her away because that's what men do when the right thing requires them to be brave and they are scared. He paid a cousin to keep quiet, and he bought a train ticket, and he told himself he'd do better next time. Next time took 40 years. The girl had a girl. The girl's girl grew up and made your son believe that life would be a movie if he just worked hard enough. And then a night came when the road was ice, and his seatbelt stuck and physics did what it does. And everybody calls it an accident, like fate is a person you can yell at. You're her mother, I said. Lila's. Elena's mouth twisted. You always were quick, she said. Yes, I am. I was. I don't know which tense mothers use when they choose a different life in a moment's panic and then spend the rest of their life paying interest on it. Then why? I asked, and I didn't realize I was weeping until the words clotted. Did you put her in a stove? I didn't, she said, and for the first time her voice cracked. I left her with him, with Harlan. I didn't want to be a mother, Peg. Not the kind my mother was, not the kind I grew up with, not the kind that never leaves a place but always somehow leaves the people in it. I wanted to keep the part of me that laughed at Ben's jokes. I wanted to keep the part that touched your son in the middle of the night and believed the whole world would forgive me in the morning. I wanted to keep 1,000 things that didn't belong to me. And then Nate died, and I found out what the inside of a scream looks like. And then I found out I was pregnant, and I tried to make it a math problem. You can't make a life a math problem. She took a step closer, and her breath made the air between us a small storm. I went to see him, she said. Harlan, I told him the truth. I told him I couldn't. I told him I wasn't made for long nights and small hands. He looked at me and didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said he'd handle it. That's exactly what he said. I'll handle it. Men say that a lot when they don't know what they're saying. He took her. He put her in a room with quilts and old music and the smell of pancakes, and I breathed. I went to work. I signed papers. I made arrangements for him to be dead so men would stop knocking to see if his woodpile needed stacking. He paid me and told me he'd pay me again when he'd done what he needed to do with his papers. I counted on that second paying. It never came. You faked his death, I said. Then you planned to sell his property. I planned to sell it to someone who would pull down the sheds and put up houses with garages that look like barns for people who think they want to be country until it snows, she said. And then something happened that wasn't part of the story. What? I asked. The wire at my collar felt like a hummingbird I needed to stay still. He changed his will, she said. He named her. He named Lila. He wrote the kind of sentences that make men feel like they are saints because they did exactly what they should have done in the first place. He left everything to a person who can't hold a pen. He left nothing for the person who made the world get out of his way just long enough to write those sentences. He cheated me. You cheated him first, I said. She shrugged. You can't cheat a man out of money when the man never planned to spend it, she said. He was going to die. He was going to die, and the land was going to go to the county or to a cousin nobody had seen since Nixon, and I was going to be the woman who turned a dead man's place into something a living person could use. That's what I told myself when I wrote the numbers on the paper and signed his name on the line. Where is he? I asked. Where is Harlan? She tilted her head like a cat listening. Dead, she said. He did that part on his own. He ran out of time. He ran out of breath. He died in the chair in the sugar house because the house was the only place he'd ever done anything that made sense. He died, and then I did what I had always done. I cleaned up. I made arrangements. You call me a villain. I call me a woman who does not faint. My hands were shaking now so bad I had to shove them in my coat pockets. You called me tonight, I said. What do you want? Credit, she said. And mercy. And the bag you brought if we're keeping score. There's no baby in it, I said. I know, she said. Tom Ward is not hard to fool, but he is not easy either. She took another step. I want you to go to that judge you'll inevitably go to and tell her this is not a simple story. I want you to tell the nurse who writes notes at the end of her shift that I wasn't a monster when I sat in the chair in the NICU and held my own child and decided to put her down and walk away. I want you to tell Lila when she's old enough to look over your shoulder while you're making pancakes and ask about her mother that I was a human being who made the wrong choices for reasons that felt right at the time. I want you to tell her that I loved her. It's a stupid word, but I did, in the stupider ways. You want me to absolve you, I said. And the bitterness in my voice surprised me. I want you to be honest, which is the only thing you know how to be, she said. And I want money. She said it without shame. Enough to make New Hampshire possible. Enough to make the woman I was at 25 stop laughing at the woman I am now. Enough to buy quiet. Quiet comes free with regret, I said. Not the kind that lets you sleep, she said softly. There was a rustle at the door. It was soft. If I hadn't been a woman who has learned that soft sounds deserve attention, I might have missed it. Elena heard it too. She moved like a fox hears a twig crack. The gun appeared in her hand like a magic trick, small and black, the kind of thing men buy for women when men want to pretend they are generous and thoughtful about safety. Tom, she said into the dark, I know you're there. A voice came from the yard. Elena, Sheriff Ward said, you've talked long enough. Put the gun down. You have no idea what you're interrupting, she said. It was almost a moment of truth. It still can be, he said, just not the kind that ends with a body. She glanced at me, and there was a softness at the edge of her mouth like a woman deciding whether to break or to harden. Then she lifted the gun and pointed it at my chest. Stop, Tom said, the word like a whip crack. Elena, stop. She laughed. The problem with women like Peg, she said, is that life keeps asking them to be saints, and something in us keeps saying yes. I'm tired of saints. She squeezed. The noise was smaller than I expected, a punctuation mark in a long sentence. The heat hit my shoulder like a hornet, and then I was on my knees and the floorboards were cold, and the breath in my chest was a tenant who suddenly wanted out. And then the night exploded with light. Men in dark coats poured through the doorway. Someone tackled Elena, and the gun skittered across the floor, and then someone else kicked it away. There was yelling, the practiced kind that people who practice for this do when it is actually happening. A hand pressed on my wound, and the voice it belonged to said, "Stay with me, Peg." And I wanted to tell the voice I was older than the voice and it should show some respect. They took Elena out past my boots. She didn't look at me. She tucked her chin in and walked like a person who has decided to be small on purpose. Sheriff Ward crouched over me. "You stubborn woman," he said, but he was smiling with wet eyes. "Keep your eyes open." "I'm not finished," I said, and I wasn't sure if I meant the story or the living. Maybe both. The hospital smelled the way hospitals do at 3 a.m. when the people who can go home have gone home, and the ones who can't look at the ceiling and listen to the hum of machines. The doctor who sewed me up told me the bullet had missed anything interesting, which is a medical way of saying I would hurt like hell for weeks, but be around to tell the story with my arm in a sling. Nora appeared like an angel, pretends she's just a nurse, and told me that Lila was fine, and that she had frowned at the world with all the gravity a human being can bring to a frown. The trial did not take years. Sometimes the part of the world that works slowly decides to sprint. Elena's lawyer tried to make the tape in the sugar house sound like a conversation in which I manipulated a poor grieving woman into a confession. The wire said different. The ledger said different. The notary said, "I remember now, it was him. It was that winner. He came to the porch with a woman who wore too much perfume, and he watched me write his name like he needed to see if my hand shook. The jury did not like being asked to pretend they hadn't heard what they heard. They came back after a lunch of turkey sandwiches and a nap and said guilty as if it were a word they were glad to be finished with. I sat in the back of the courtroom with my shoulder in a sling and my hand on the strap of my bag and did not look at Elena when they led her away. It is a small cruelness to deny someone your eyes, and I did not want to be cruel. I wanted to be finished. The thing about finishing is that it is not an event, but a process. DCF came to my house 3 times a week for 6 weeks. They measured the distance from the mattress to the floor and counted the number of smoke detectors and asked me questions like, "What would you do in a fire?" and "What is your plan if she chokes?" I answered them with the patience I would want someone to have with me if I had to wear shoes too small. I put caps on the outlets and latches on the cupboards. I made the old upstairs room into a nursery with yellow paint and a mobile with little paper birds that turned lazily in the late afternoon sun. The judge was a woman in her 50s, with hair as neat as a librarian's, and eyes that looked like they had seen men cry and women lie, and decided to keep them all in her heart until it was time to set them down. She listened to Alana's report. She listened to Nora's letter. She listened to a man in a suit talk about legal guardianship, and to me talk about lullabies. "Miss Hollis," she said finally, "you are 65. You are not rich, you are healthy enough but not perfect, and you are the only person in this room who looks at that child like there is nothing else she could be but yours. I am granting temporary kinship custody to you for 6 months with review." I slept that night like a person who has been forgiven. I brought Lila home 2 days later. The house felt brave. Those first weeks were a kind of holy I didn't know you could live. Exhaustion and awe. The clatter of bottles in boiling water, and the sigh a baby makes when the warm fills her small belly. The feel of a small hand opening and closing reflexively around your finger, and the way your own hand looks big and old and beautiful in its usefulness when you hold it in the light. The way your shoulder learns again the weight of a child when sleep happens on your chest, and your heart remembers how to beat in time with someone else's. I learned to do everything with one hand because Lila liked to keep the other for herself. I learned that the world gets smaller in the best ways when you optimize all of your energy for a small person's next nap. I learned that joy can be loud and that sometimes it sounds like one woman singing the same 3 songs over and over because she can't remember the words to any others. But the person she is singing to does not care about lyrics. People help the way they used to in old stories. Pastor Lucas from the white steepled church brought soup. The woman from the bakery sent over 6 blueberry scones and made a face like she didn't want anyone to see her be compassionate. The teenagers who sweep floors at the library came by on Saturdays to vacuum and pretend they weren't looking at the baby, and then they stood in the doorway and smiled like their faces would split from joy. In the middle of all that goodness, I had the moment I knew would come. It came on a Tuesday when the sun had gotten itself up and over the hill and made the light in my kitchen look like lemons. The phone rang. I almost didn't answer. I did. "Peg," Elena said from the other end of the collect call from the county facility. "I need you to do something for me." "No," I said. "You lost the right to ask me things." "Then do it for her," she said. "Do it for Lila. Tell her something true about me someday. Tell her I was not a monster. Tell her I was a coward who thought she was brave. Tell her I tried to love her the way I knew how, and that the way I knew how was broken." I stood by the window with the phone pressed between my shoulder and my ear, watching the wind move the pine boughs. "I'll tell her you were human," I said finally, "and I'll tell her that means you could have been better." "That's fair," she said softly. "One more thing. The truth about Nate." My breath caught the way it always does when his name appears in a room like a bird you thought had flown away. "What truth?" "I did not make him crash," she said. "I swallowed pills to sleep that week. I said words that cut. I told him I wanted a life that didn't have diapers in it, and he told me love was being brave for the thing that scared you, and I laughed at him and he drove away angry. But I didn't cut his brakes. I didn't pay a man to do it. I wish I had something dramatic and clean to confess, but the truth is smaller and uglier. I let him go out into a night that would have killed anyone. I thought the roads were the villain, and you could cast a road in a play and make it take the blame, but the only villain was timing and fear in me. There are 100 different kinds of relief. The one I felt then wasn't the kind that makes you cry. It was the kind that makes your back unclench for the first time in 2 years. "All right," I said. "That is what I will carry then. That is heavy enough." "Thank you," she said, and the line clicked. 6 months later, I stood again before the judge. This time, the courtroom smelled like coffee and the papers in front of her were thicker. She smiled at me when I handed her the photo Nora had taken of me and Lila on the day we planted tomatoes in an old feed trough, the baby holding a dirt clod like a treasure. "Miss Hollis," she said, "I have read the visits report and the medical notes and the social services evaluation and the letter from your pastor and one from a nurse, and 3 from people who call themselves your neighbors. They all say the same thing, and I think you know what it is." "The same thing as what?" I asked, and my voice shook. "That the child is thriving," she said. "That you are capable and strong and good, and not in a way that is sentimental, in a way that is useful. I am granting you permanent custody, and if you wish to pursue adoption, my clerk will help you complete the process." I don't remember leaving the courthouse. I remember the sun. I remember the sound my heart made, which was not a sound anyone else could hear. I remember bending and lifting her out of her car seat and holding her like I had been holding my breath for months and now finally could exhale. Years fold in on themselves if you let them. Lila turned 1, then 2. She called me Mags because Grandma was too many letters and because once I told her a story about my own grandmother who had been named Maggie, and Lila had commandeered the name like a ship. She put rocks in her pockets, like every smart girl does. She ran through puddles with her arms out like balance was a thing she could order up from the sky. She cried when the dog next door barked too loud and then put her small hand against his nose and told him it was okay. She learned to say please, and more, and again, and her face when I said again 3 times was the face of a person who cannot believe their own luck. On her third birthday, I hung paper birds from the maple branches in the yard and made a cake that listed to one side but tasted like everything right. The teenagers from the library were older and pretended not to eat 2 pieces. Pastor Lucas prayed words that sounded like talking. Nora held Lila and did not cry, and then she cried anyway when Lila laid her head on Nora's shoulder, because babies teach nurses, and nurses teach babies, and the circle is a pretty one. At sunset, after everyone had gone, after the plates were stacked and the paper birds turned slowly in the evening air like small thoughts, I took Lila's hand and walked to the edge of the sugar bush, where the creek runs thin in dry years and fat in spring. "This is where you were found," I said, and the child, who was all legs and hair and certainty, looked up at me with the face she uses when she's filing something for later. "Found?" she asked. "Found," I said, and I said it lightly. People can be lost and then found many times in one life. You can be lost on a road and found at a kitchen table. You can be lost in your head and found in a person's eyes. You can be lost in a winter and found in a freezer. I smiled then, because sometimes the truth is too odd to hold without a joke nestled in it. Your Mama Elena and your Grandpa Harlan and I, we all got lost. You're how we get found. "Where's Mama Elena?" she asked. She asked it like she was asking where her blue cup was. Children give you mercy that way. "She is far away," I said, "because she made choices that hurt people. And when you hurt people, you sometimes have to go be far away to learn not to do it again." "She bad?" Lila asked. "She's human," I said, which is someone who can be bad and good in different moments. "She loved you in a broken way. I love you in a way that tries to be less broken and is still sometimes broken. And your Grandpa Harlan loved you in a way that made him change at the end when changing is the hardest thing. He left you a name on paper. I will leave you 1,000 breakfasts." She nodded, content with that mathematics. A chickadee skittered through the birch and landed near enough that I could see its small bright eye. The creek moved on, the same as always, the same as never. People always ask me, when they write letters after hearing the story or when they catch me in the aisle at the IGA and pretend to be looking at tomatoes, how I could forgive. They make forgiveness into a thing like a staircase with numbered steps. First you do this, then you do that. Then you're at the top and the view is good. I tell them the truth, even when they don't love it. I tell them, forgiveness is not a staircase. It is a garden. You pull the weeds that grow back. You do it because you like your garden more than you like your weeds. Some days you do it with your back straight and your heart singing. Some days you curse at the dandelions and leave them be. You keep a path clear for the person you are trying to become. On the 5th anniversary of the day the shed collapsed, and a voice came out of a small recorder and said, "I have a granddaughter. I took Lila to the courthouse with a new dress and a new braid. The clerk handed me a paper, and I signed my name in the careful script my 3rd grade teacher would have liked. The judge smiled and said, 'Congratulations,' and I looked at the child who had been my girl for years already and was now my girl on every paper that mattered and on the ones that didn't. And I thought about how life writes itself over and over, and the only thing we get to decide is whether we pick up the pen." That night, in the quiet hour after she went to sleep, and I set the last plate in the rack to dry, I took out the green ribbon I had saved from the day I opened the box in my kitchen and found a will that changed what I thought I knew. I tied that ribbon around the handle of the junk drawer where I keep the spare tape and the string and the odd screws. When Lila is older and asks me why there is a ribbon on a drawer, I will tell her it's to remind me that some things worth finding have to be kept cold until the right hands come along. If this story found you today, if it sat down with you the way a neighbor sits on your porch when the air is sweet and the light is kind, then tell someone you love them in the voice you use when you mean it. Write a letter if you have to. Open the drawer and take out the ribbon. Say the name you are afraid of saying, and if you are the person who needs to be found, leave your story where a woman like me will stumble over it and then carry it to the place it belongs. I found my neighbor's will in a freezer, and the sheriff told me he had died 6 months ago. Both things were true for a moment. Then the truth shifted and made a bigger shape. It included a baby and a stove, and a room with a glass wall and a judge who understood that a woman can be old and fierce at the same time. It included someone I hated and forgave in pieces. Someone I loved and lost in the way that does not end. It included me, a librarian who never wanted to be a detective and became one anyway because someone trusted me with a box. And it includes you now, because you listened. That's how stories save us. They make more room. They say, make a spot at your table. A stranger might need soup. They say, the person you are at 3 a.m. is not the only person you know how to be. They say, if you stand by the creek long enough, the water that was too cold will be just water, and the stone that hurt your foot will be the one your granddaughter uses to make a bridge for the ants. If you ever come by my place, I'll show you the sugar house. I'll show you the maple that leans exactly the way I do when I listen. I'll make you coffee that's too strong and pancakes that are just right. Lila will run through the yard with rocks in her pocket and birds in her hair, and I will ask you about your life like it matters the way it does. And when you leave, I'll tell you what I tell everyone now without being embarrassed by it, the way I might have been when I was younger. Be kind. Be braver than the person you were yesterday. If you run out of bravery, come sit with me. We'll look at the creek together and take turns holding the ribbon.